All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is a free agent Friday where we recap some of the Falcons' free agent signings, including giving my thoughts on Marcus Mariota, as well as being joined by the host of Locked On Raiders to talk about Casey Hayward and Locked On Bears to talk about Damien Williams, Elijah Wilkinson, and Teez Tabor.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, writing weekly content for the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons, and the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. And of course, you can find Locked On Falcons free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. Give us a like when you do that. YouTube video goes up earlier than the audio version of the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. So again, another reason to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So today's episode, we will be later joined by Locked On Raiders host, your boy Q, to talk about Casey Hayward, also talk about the Raiders offseason. Later on, we'll be joined by Locked On Bears host Lorin Cox to talk about the three ex-Bears free agents that the Falcons picked up: Elijah Wilkinson, Damien Williams, and Teez Tabor, as well as talk about Justin Fields and the Bears offseason as well. You know, we got to talk about Justin Fields, guys, whenever I get the opportunity to do so. Stop hating on Justin Fields. This is a pro Justin Fields podcast. But first, we'll talk about another quarterback in Marcus Mariota, and I'll give you my thoughts on Marcus Mariota. Those two, interviews with Q and Lorin occurred last week. That's part of the reason why I didn't ask Q about Marcus Mariota, but I like the Mariota signing. This is one of the two that I enjoy, the two ex-Raiders that the Falcons signed in Mariota and Casey Hayward. Later on, you'll hear why. I like these two moves for the Falcons. Nothing else has really moved the needle for me as far as the free agent pickups in a major way, I should say. And so I think Mariota makes a ton of sense for the Falcons. We've talked previously last summer when we signed Josh Rosen about reclamation projects and what makes for successful reclamation projects. And I mentioned in that episode that Marcus Mariota, a player like him, that when you look back over the last 30 years of the successful reclamation projects, most of those guys like the Ryan Tannehills, the Rich Gannons, the Kurt Warners, had 50, 60, 70, 100 or more starts under their belt before they were successfully reclaimed. And Mariota, with like 60 plus starts in his NFL career, does make a ton of sense for a reclamation project. Now, as you've heard me say over the last 6 or so months, to me, it doesn't make a ton of sense in a world where Matt Ryan is your starting quarterback to try for a reclamation project when you can go much cheaper and get a player potentially with greater upside in a draft pick. But obviously in a post Matt Ryan world, it does make a lot of sense for Mariota to be that guy. And I think he does have some upside. But part of the reason why you're not going to hear me give as much credit for this signing as you would think, given that I do like Mariota as a player, is not only because, I'm just a hater, but it's also because I just don't have that high expectations that Mariota is going to start the entire season. Because I believe that the Falcons will draft a quarterback this upcoming April, and that guy's going to play. When you go back over the last, 5 or 6 drafts and look at, I think over 80% of the 23 first-round quarterbacks started at least like 6 or 7 games as rookies. Most of those guys started 10 or more games. The 4 exceptions were guys like Jordan Love, Patrick Mahomes, Paxton Lynch, and Trey Lance. 3 out of those 4 guys played on teams with Super Bowl aspirations in the 49ers, Packers, and Chiefs. And then the 4th guy in Lynch, played on a team that had won the Super Bowl previous years. You go even to the second round picks in that span. 5 of those guys, 3 out of those 5, wound up starting 4 or 5 games: Drew Lock, Deshaun Kaiser, and Jalen Hurts. And then the 2 exceptions, Christian Hackenberg and Kyle Trask. Trask played on the Super Bowl aspirant Buccaneers team. And so this has been something, you've heard me talk about basically since like week 3 of September, that the Falcons were going to probably draft a quarterback. And, now that Matt Ryan has been traded, it feels like that's even a stronger likelihood of that outcome. And we talked earlier this week about process versus results on the podcast. And while I think the results will ultimately be the same, the process to get to this point where the Falcons seemingly will definitely draft a quarterback, was craziness. And that's part of the reason why I have such criticisms leveled at this current regime. But, talking about the past, quarterbacks and rookies playing, basically overwhelmingly the case is that unless you go to a team with Super Bowl aspirations, you as a rookie quarterback are probably in the first couple of rounds are probably going to play. And I think the Falcons certainly are a team that do not fall in the category of a team with Super Bowl aspirations. Now, of course, the response is always going to be, hey, why not wait until next year? It's a better quarterback class. And I get that. Certainly in a world where you were trying to maximize the last year of Matt Ryan's career, it made sense to instead using that pick on a quarterback that was going to sit the bench. It made sense for you to use that on another position player that could actually help maximize, this last year of Matt Ryan and potentially help set up, a future quarterback in 2023 and beyond for success. But now that we've gotten rid of Matt Ryan, it just doesn't make sense to me in order to not take a swing at this thing. We've already talked earlier in the week, there's just the low hit rate on quarterbacks. And even in a stronger quarterback class, as most people assume the 2023 group will be, even if the Falcons get a top 5 pick, the hit rate on a top 5, top 10 quarterback, as I've talked about previously on the podcast this week, is like somewhere between 20 and 40%. And so even in a stronger quarterback class, you're still unlikely to hit on that pick. And so if you want to maximize your chances of getting a hit, with a batting average somewhere between 200 and 400, you need to get more than one at bat, right? And so to me, again, in a world where Matt Ryan is no longer here, it just doesn't make any sense to me to pass on drafting a quarterback, of taking that swing at this point in time. You might as well take the swing. What do you have to lose at this point in time? Like, how is it going to hurt if that rookie's going to play? Might as well take a shot at it. I think about it as in that sense where, like, to me, arguing against the Falcons taking a quarterback, to me at this point in time, just doesn't make any sense to me. Now you can argue when the Falcons should take a quarterback. I don't think you should be arguing if the Falcons should take a quarterback. So whether it's round 1, round 2, round 5, whatever. But to me, the argument against taking a quarterback, period, just to me doesn't make a ton of sense at this point in time. I won't sit here and say it's a lock that they're going to take a quarterback, because again, it could depend heavily on, as a team that is drafting the best player available, it all depends on the draft board, allegedly drafting the best player available. It depends on how the board falls. So the board could fall a certain way where the Falcons do not wind up taking a quarterback. But I certainly think if all things being equal, and we know that they never are, but I think the Falcons will try to draft a quarterback. Now, circling back to Mariota, that's part of the reason why, even though Mariota is the starting quarterback, even though I do expect Mariota to be the starter week 1, it's hard for me to get super excited about this move, even if I like the player, because I just don't think eventually, I think that rookie quarterback is probably going to be starting week 17. And it's just a matter of time before Mariota is riding the bench. And it's very similar to the situation you saw in Tennessee this past year, where, Marcus Mariota is the stand-in for Tyrod Taylor, and, the quote unquote inevitable rookie that we draft is the stand-in for Davis Mills, and Mills wound up starting 11 games this past year. Now 6 of those starts were due to Tyrod Taylor. So theoretically, if Tyrod had never gotten hurt, he could have started up to 12 games or more this upcoming season, or this past season. But the main reason why Tyrod lasted that long, for the games that he did wind up starting, was that, during those early, those first 3 or 4 starts that Tyrod had, the Texans did win a couple of those games, and they were competitive in those games. And so the Texans were trying to, so that's going to be the key for Mariota's longevity. If the Falcons can win a couple of games early this season, and be competitive, even in the games that they lose, and lose those games by, a score or less or more, 10 points or whatever the case may be, and are in it for, 3+ quarters, which was not necessarily always the case with the team this past year. And so that's part of the reason why I'm not super optimistic about that, but, hope springs eternal. Then Mariota may be able to last, the majority of a season. But if not, and the Falcons get off to a rocky start this year, and they start the season like 1-4 or 1-5 or whatever the case may be, then there's going to be a loud clamoring for the rookie to get reps. Like, what's the point of starting Mariota if you're not competitive, if you're not in a position to win games? And we'll sort of see how Arthur Smith handles all that. We know he has sort of a proclivity to be a little bit, confrontational, a little stubborn, however you want to call it. So we'll see how that all plays out. But I think watching Mariota, he was very impressive. In the one game I did watch, I went back and watched his 2020 performance against the Chargers on a Thursday night game when he was with the Raiders, where he came in for an injured Derek Carr early in that game. I did not go back and watch his 2019 performance with the Titans, in large part because I did watch it at the time because the Falcons did play the Titans that season. And you guys will recall that I was very upset with how the Falcons performed in that game against the Titans because my expectations was that Mariota was struggling early in that season, was not looking like a high level quarterback. And so that led to me thinking that the Falcons would, actually beat the Titans, and they got absolutely obliterated in that game. I don't let these things go, which is, a wonder to me why, if you're a regular listener to the Locked On Falcons podcast, you don't understand why I haven't let the Matt Ryan trade go. Like, Sam Congato, 28-3, and the fact that the Falcons only got a 3rd round pick from Matt Ryan are 3 things that I will never let go. But we won't talk about that on today's episode. But I do think watching that 2020 game against the Chargers, let's stay on subject. I'm rambling. I thought Mariota was impressive in that game. He ran a lot. I think he led the team in rushing that game with 88 yards. Him and Darren Waller had a really strong connection. Waller had, I think, 9 catches for 150 yards in that game. And you can sort of imagine him having a similar connection with Kyle Pitts. So theoretically, I think Mariota could do good work here in Atlanta when he's, at his peak, as he looked to be in that Raiders-Chargers game. He does look like a legit top 15 quarterback. The problem is you get the peaks and the valleys with Mariota. It's the inconsistency, and that's where you really want the supporting cast to really have to step up, and having a strong running game, having an offensive line, having weapons to throw to, and having a good defense. You kind of need that with a quarterback like Mariota to sort of smooth out all those games where he's going to be a little bit more down. And as you guys well know and have been telling me, insisting to me for the last 4 to 6 months, the Falcons don't have any of those things, don't have that caliber of supporting cast. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not super optimistic that, Mariota is going to play that much, because I'm projecting kind of 3 to 5 wins for the Falcons this year. We'll see if that changes over the next couple of months, but currently that's kind of my projection for this upcoming season. So for me, it's kind of an over under 6 starts for Mariota. I put out a Twitter poll that's going to run till Sunday, and we can maybe talk about the results later in next week's episode or whatever the case may be. But I would take the under on 6 starts for Mariota this upcoming season. So we'll just sort of see how that all plays out. And that's where we'll leave the Marcus Mariota conversation. And, assuming the Falcons take a quarterback, probably won't spend too much time revisiting Marcus Mariota on this podcast until, like, I don't know, June at this point in time. So that's where we'll leave that. And we'll move on to talk a little bit more about his former teammate in Casey Hayward with your boy Q, and talk also about the Raiders' big moves this offseason. And again, want to remind you that this was recorded last weekend, almost a week ago. So it's before the Matt Ryan trade. But we'll get Q's thoughts on Casey Hayward and what he's going to bring, as well as Q's thoughts on sort of, these big sexy moves that the Las Vegas Raiders are pulling on today's episode. But before we get into all of that, guys, I do want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. And I always like to recommend what your second listen should be. And of course, why not plug the Locked On Braves podcast? We know that baseball season is just around the corner, so go check out what's the latest going on with the Braves on the Locked On Braves podcast, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So, guys, the NCAA tournament is ongoing, and I know there's been too many upsets. Your bracket is already busted. So if you want to make a little bit of money back betting on some of these games, on some of these upset specials and whatnot, you can head on over to betonline.net, the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. And, if it's not March Madness, you can bet on a variety of things, including NBA, boxing, UFC, golf, hockey, esports, your favorite Vegas casino games. I'm still looking at all these draft props for, if you think Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be a top 5 pick, there's good money right now available on that prop, specifically at betonline.net. So head on over to the website today and use your mobile device to sign up and learn all about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, guys, you're Locked On Falcons, but I'm here with the host of Locked On Raiders, Locked On Bets, Locked On NFL, your boy Q. You know him, you love him. Q, my friend, maybe after we talk a little bit about Casey Hayward, we need to be comparing what our Locked On checks look like, because you're all over the network, and I'm wondering, you're getting a little bit of a pay increase, and I might have to take it up with David Locke or whatever the case may be.
Hey, man, if we ain't grinding, we're doing something wrong, right? So that's all I do, man, is stay on the grind. But I appreciate being on the show. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, so we're here to talk about Casey Hayward, the Falcons' new free agent corner that they picked up earlier to a 2-year deal. He spent this past year with the Las Vegas Raiders after 4 seasons with the Green Bay Packers to start out his career, then 5 years with the San Diego and Los Angeles Chargers. He's going to be 33 this upcoming season. I think he turns in September. So I guess I'll ask the most vague and general question. What are the Falcons getting in Casey Hayward?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man, you're getting a really good shutdown corner. I mean, he really is, and he's a guy that the Raiders picked up late in free agency last year. And I thought, okay, well, he's with the Chargers. He knows the division. He knows Gus Bradley really well because that was his defensive coordinator, but he's a little older, and the Chargers thought it was okay to let him go. So I thought, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what kind of player he is. And, man, I'll tell you, he was the best corner that the Raiders had. I mean, he really was. And, he plays that zone coverage. He plays that really well. He's not a guy that's going to create a bunch of turnovers, but he's a guy that's going to play his assignment. He's going to know where his man is at all time, and like I said, he's going to play in that zone, and he's just going to be there, man. And he's smart. He's going to help the young guys along, whatever young guys the Falcons have. He's going to help them. I'm telling you, man, he was really impressive with what he was able to do in the year that he was in Las Vegas. And I really thought he was going to end up in Indianapolis with the Colts because of Gus Bradley. But I know that they have some guys already in the secondary, so I guess they didn't really need to bring him along. But, man, I'll tell you, Atlanta's going to be happy with what they see with Casey Hayward there for sure. Let's put it like this. A lot of Raider fans were mad that he's no longer with the silver and black. That tells you what you need to know.
There you go. I guess my next question is, and it sounds like you already answered it, because I imagine you were concerned with his age that there would be a little bit of drop off. And it looked like maybe towards the end of his time in Chargers, there was maybe a little bit of a drop off. I guess my follow-up question is, you talk about him playing in that Gus Bradley zone heavy defense. Do you feel like, given his age and given maybe the expectations that he may be slowing down a little bit, that he needs to be played in that zone heavy scheme, or could he still produce in a scheme that may ask him to play a little bit more man coverage?
I think he can. I think the one thing that you want to watch out for is if he's going to be matched up with someone that's just a speedster, like a burner. I mean, that was my only concern because of his age. He's a little bit older, so he's going to slow down a little bit, but he's so smart. He's a veteran. He's got that savvy, and so it's so funny when the Raiders signed him, I thought, okay, he's going to go in there and compete for a job. And it was so funny because then head coach John Gruden said, this dude ain't here to teach somebody. He's not here to be a mentor. This dude's here for jobs. Like he's going to take someone's job. And he did. He basically made Damon Arnett, who's no longer with the team either, he made him expendable and coming off the bench. I mean, literally, he took a former first-round pick and sidelined him for a veteran in Casey Hayward. And so we had asked him after one game, we said, hey, man, you're playing really well. All the talk before the season was that you're lost a step. You're a little bit older. You didn't have a great season last year with the Chargers. And it was so funny because he said, well, I haven't heard that. I don't know what they're talking about. I'm out here to ball. I mean, it's so funny. And of course, these guys all hear all that stuff. They just act like they don't.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It was funny. Just the way he kind of, his attention to detail was, whatever they're talking about, man, I'm out here to ball. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to handle my business. And he was a super solid contributor for the Raiders. I mean, I can't say it enough. I think Atlanta got a really good defensive back.
Well, Q, I am definitely sold. If I was on the fence, and I'm imagine a lot of the listeners and viewers are like, I don't know about this. I'm sold now. So I got no more Casey Hayward questions. We'll take what you have to say and run with that. I do have Raiders questions because They get a Devontae Adams, they get Chandler Jones. These moves are like huge moves that in any other offseason would be the talk of the town. Like, oh my God, the Raiders are
Right.
doing incredible things. But in that division, given some of the moves that these other teams have made so far this offseason, and given the perception that, I think a lot of people are looking at some of these other teams and saying, oh, those teams are, Super Bowl contenders and whatnot. And meanwhile, the Raiders are getting sort of the short end of the stick is like, oh, they're the fourth place team or whatever the case may be. I guess my question is like, where are you right now in terms of this offseason that they're having? And where do you sort of see this team's ceiling potentially this season? Obviously, we know the offseason is not over and there's still moves to be made. But like right now, where are you feeling about this Raiders team?
I love what the Raiders are doing. I think the sky's the limit for this team. I really do. And this division is going to be so fun. I mean, think about it. You have Kansas City with, Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes and everything, high wire act. Of course, they just continue to load up. They're going to be, they just got Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, they're going to be a juggernaut. We know that. But then Denver gets Russell Wilson. Of course, you saw everything that the Chargers are doing. I mean, this is just a hell of a division, man. I'm so excited to see it. And I'll tell you this. I don't think there's one team in the division that can say, oh, this is a clear-cut favorite here. I think every team is pretty much right around the same area. Now, I'll always defer to Kansas City because they're the champs until they're not. So they've been winning the division, so I'll give them that. But I think the rest of the teams are keeping pace. I think that they all look at each other and say, one way or the other, we could beat that team. If it's defensively, if it's offensively. I mean, the Raiders go out and make a move for Chandler Jones. I didn't see that one coming. They had Unique Ngakoue and Max Crosby, and I thought, okay, they're going to roll with that next year. They go out and make a move for Chandler Jones and then trade Ngakoue, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Chandler Jones is an absolute stud. I mean, this dude, he's a coach on the field. He's a guy that's got over 100 career sacks. He's a guy that can play the run. I mean, there's so many things to like about him. And then all of a sudden they turn around and go and make a trade for Devontae Adams. It's like, whoa, okay. All right, because there was a lot of Raider fans that thought that they were rebuilding. They're just being so quiet. They're not doing anything. And I kept saying, man, Josh McDaniels didn't go to the team to rebuild. And then all of a sudden you see these moves back to back to back. So, it's fun, man. It's an arms race in the AFC West. It's going to be one of those divisions to watch. But, you don't win championships in March. You got to go get it done in the regular season. But it's something to get excited about. And I think that all of the Raider fans are pumped up now, seeing the moves that Dave Ziegler and Champ Kelly are doing in that Raider front office.
Well, I have a little bit of recent experience with a team trying to energize their fan base and not necessarily working out particularly well. So, kudos to the Raiders for, accomplishing that goal. And certainly I think that there's a lot of things to be excited about in Las Vegas. And Q, before we let you go, let the listeners know, what some of the stuff you're working on over at Locked On Raiders, Locked On Bets, Locked On NFL, and elsewhere.
Man, I'm just keeping it moving, man. Following this crazy offseason that we've been having as far as just the NFL in general. I mean, one day it's Devontae Adams being traded. Next day it's Deshaun Watson going to Cleveland. Atlanta with Matt Ryan. I mean, there's so many things I've been talking about. And I'll tell you this, and I don't know what your listeners feel like, and I don't know what your guys' conversations have been, but I couldn't believe that Atlanta was in the Deshaun Watson conversation to begin with. Yeah. You know what I mean? I thought, hey, man, Matt Ryan still got something in the tank, man. Don't discredit that dude, but I want to give him a lot of credit for what he did. I mean, knowing that they were looking to upgrade the quarterback position, possibly by bringing Watson in, you didn't see him on Twitter. You didn't see him writing letters to the city of Atlanta. So, he didn't pull a Baker Mayfield and go in the corner and pout. He just handled everything like a pro. And I can respect that, man. So that shows the leadership of Matt Ryan. I really respect what he's got going on. So just kind of following this offseason has been incredible. And I can't wait to, obviously the draft's going to be here in Las Vegas. So that's something that talking about. But now with Devontae Adams, the Raiders don't have the first or second round pick. But who cares? You got Devontae Adams, and there's a Derek Carr extension on the way as well. So kind of been monitoring that, seeing how that shakes out. But just really – the biggest thing, man, I think just following this new front office and what they're doing and the way they operate coming over from New England. So it's a lot of fun with the Locked On Raiders show, of course. Locked On Bets, man, March Madness is going on. I mean, number one, Baylor got knocked off earlier. I mean, there's all kind of craziness going on. I love March Madness. So there's a lot of gambling aspects. You can look at that. And of course, again, like the Locked On NFL. NFL's king, man. It doesn't even ever sleep. So it's hectic. It's crazy. It's a lot of fun, but that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I had a feeling we might get a crazy offseason, and we're definitely getting one in the NFL. These last 2 weeks have been the craziest 2 weeks I've ever seen.
Yes, I love it, man. I do. And it's funny. It's like we talk about March Madness and we always talk basketball, but
Mm-hmm.
the NFL has really it's overdone it. It's
Mm-hmm.
outshined it, and it's like, yeah, hey, this basketball game is fantastic, but look at that move that was just made. It's like, man, are you kidding me? So yeah, it's a good time to be alive, man. It's a good time to be talking some sports because this is what we do on the daily, man. And this NFL thing, they got it going on for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Q, I appreciate you joining me and talking Casey Hayward, talking Raiders, talking NFL madness, and I appreciate it. And look forward to chatting with you in the future whenever we get the chance to. Probably not this season, but certainly in the cards in the future.
Yeah, man, we got to catch up soon, man. Shout out to the ATL. I ain't mad, man. I
All
love
right.
that. I love Atlanta, man. Got to give Atlanta some love.
So, guys, that's it for your boy Q. We'll move on to Locked On Bears host Lorin Cox to give us his insights into Damien Williams, Elijah Wilkinson, and Teez Tabor, as well as talk a little bit more about the Bears offseason. Again, this was recorded last weekend with Lorin, so we didn't get any insight into Jermaine Ifedi, who did visit the Falcons on Thursday. Another former Bears player. Will be interesting if the Falcons do pull the trigger on that. Certainly more free agents to talk about, but we'll get into that conversation with Lorin Cox coming up. But as always, want to remind you guys of what potentially your second listen should be after you make Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, always got to plug the Locked On NFL podcast, giving you all the scoops on all the big stories around the NFL and storylines and whatnot. So check out Locked On NFL on the same podcast platforms you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So the month of March is all about the puff flavor over at Built Bar. And Built Bar, if you don't know about it, is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And it's even better than a candy bar because it not only tastes good, it's good for you. Built Bars are low in sugar, calories, and carbs, high in protein and fiber. And the puffs are the first protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowy goodness. And, like all Built Bars, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. And right now they have a limited time flavor of puff called the brownie batter puff flavor. So if you're a big fan of brownie batter, you can check that out at built.com. But it's not just brownie batter. You also have churro puff, banana cream pie, coconut marshmallow, ruby chocolate, lemon dip cheesecake, and so many other flavors available at built.com. So go check out your favorite flavor, and you can use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your order at built.com. Again, that's LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Hey guys, you're Locked On Falcons. And of course, you're also now Locked On Bears, because Locked On Falcons increasingly becomes also the alternative Locked On Bears podcast. I'm of course joined by the host of Locked On Bears, Lorin Cox. He always seems to be coming on this podcast to talk about some former Bears, we'll be talking about Damien Williams, Elijah Wilkinson, as well as Teez Tabor, get his thoughts on the Bears offseason, as well as I often joke on Twitter that they are the alternate reality Falcons, because they made a quarterback selection last year that a lot of people, including myself, thought the Falcons would make. But we'll get into that later. Let's talk first about probably the biggest fish of the ex-Bears that the Falcons signed in Damien Williams. It's now the second offseason in a row that I've now talked to Lorin about an ex-Bears running back. Last year, of course, talking about Mike Davis. In regards to Williams, Lorin, I imagine when they signed him last offseason, the expectation was that he was going to sort of fill the Tariq Cohen size hole in the Bears offense, and then sort of started out the season that way. There were some injuries to David Montgomery early on that allowed sort of Khalil Herbert to emerge. And then Williams himself, as I understand it, hurt his knee about midway through the season. And then basically once he was healthy again, by then he was kind of the forgotten man with this sort of 1-2 punch of David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert. So I guess, given all that context, what were your impressions of Damien Williams in his lone year in Chicago?
Yeah, when he was brought in, we didn't know whether Tariq Cohen would be back or not, right? He was supposed to be, in theory, maybe even an addition to Tariq Cohen. That Cohen had torn his ACL at the beginning of the previous season, so they thought maybe by week one, absolutely it'd be almost a full 12-month response. So then, in theory, you could have all three and have this really well-rounded backfield. Of course, it kind of helped having Williams when Cohen was unable to go and ultimately missed an entire other season. But you're right, it really was kind of the Khalil Herbert show that took over, and Williams kind of was left a little bit more of a disappointment. It always felt like when he was getting the ball, it was like, well, why are you giving him the ball when you have these two younger running backs that you just want to either feed David Montgomery or give Khalil Herbert more reps to get him more experience and kind of keep getting him up to speed. And really, and he was so explosive also that you just thought he could be even more of a home run threat, I think, than Damien Williams. But he did really settle into that Tarik Cohen type role, very much their passing down back, a lot of, third down back, a lot of shotgun trying to get him, mostly just check downs from Andy Dalton for most of the season. So it felt like Williams wasn't spectacular when he was in there, but they didn't have a great offensive line in terms of run blocking. They didn't have a great offense in general in terms of getting things involved in the passing game. And it kind of felt like, given the player we had seen in Kansas City, that Williams is capable of more. Just for whatever reason in Chicago, it wasn't the right fit, wasn't the right situation, whatever it might have been. It ended up being a bit underwhelming and kind of looking around like, why is he here? Just give it to the other younger guys who happen to kind of emerge and be even better.
Yeah, so I guess you kind of answered sort of my follow-up question. Was it just kind of a bad fit given what we saw from Williams in Kansas City? And do you imagine maybe in Atlanta, and I know you're not necessarily an expert on the Falcons situation, but obviously right now, even with Cordero Patterson and Mike Davis, two ex-Bears, by the way, it feels like he won't necessarily be, at least as the Falcons roster is constructed right now, overshadowed by some younger running back that you're like, we got to get that guy in the field. Like, do you feel like Atlanta may be a better opportunity for him to get back to sort of what he was in Kansas City?
Yeah, I think so. Right. Like, he's never going to be the athlete that Cordell Patterson is, but he is smart, savvy, and he can make guys miss in space. Just doesn't feel like he's necessarily like as, dynamic. But I think in terms of a guy you can rely on down in and down out to know what you're going to get, some pass blocking, some receiving, just like an all around back that should be able to be a reliable option. I think there's plenty of opportunity for him to get back to more of that Kansas City Damien Williams in Atlanta, assuming they can manufacture more of a real offense around him than he had as far as a supporting cast goes in Chicago.
Yeah. Now, you talked about one of the reasons why Damien Williams was not nearly as effective, and maybe arguably other Bears running backs not as effective, was in their questionable offensive line play. I know they dealt with a lot of injuries at the offensive tackle position, and that led to a guy like Elijah Wilkinson getting a couple of opportunities. I think he'll wind up playing about 120 snaps for the Bears. It seemed to have a revolving door at that tackle position. I guess when Wilkinson did step on the field, how did he look?
It was mixed, right? I mean, when he was brought in, it was sort of a potential competition. He could maybe compete at left tackle. He competed at right tackle for the starting job. And then, of course, they signed Jason Peters to be their veteran at left tackle. They still had Jermaine Ifedi at right tackle, but then he gets hurt. Wilkinson gets some opportunities. And, we knew coming in that, signing him from the Denver Broncos, he was not going to be a solid go-to every game type starting offensive tackle, but there was some feeling like he had some potential and some versatility to maybe kick into guard when they needed him to. And he wasn't good, but he wasn't awful either. But similar to like the running back position, the Bears had two rookie offensive tackles that they ended up getting on the field as soon as they were healthy. They both had some injuries that they were working through themselves. But then by the end of the season, they wanted to go with their rookie left tackle and their rookie right tackle, and Wilkinson wasn't really a part of the rotation again, in large part because they had younger guys that they wanted to go to at that spot. So I wouldn't get your hopes up that Wilkinson is going to come in and absolutely solidify the position and give you a solid 16-game starter, but he could be a reliable backup off the bench with some good versatility to play either side and maybe kick inside the guard as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons sort of envision him as a swing tackle purely, or do they actually see him as competition? And right now we don't quite know the contract terms, and I guess that will kind of be determined by how much money they're paying him. If he's making, close to veteran minimum, they clearly see him more as a swing tackle competition. But if he's making, a couple $1 million, then potentially he could be, in the mix to challenge someone like Kaleb McGary, who is much maligned amongst the Falcons fan base. Although
at the very least, he's going to replace the previous Bears swing tackle in Atlanta, Jason Spriggs.
Yes.
You've got the circle of motion here.
This is crazy. I should just pass off Locked On Falcons to you, Lorin. I'll take Locked On Bears if you want. If you just ever need a break, you can just basically talk about all the Bears players on the Falcons roster, and I'll just talk about Justin Fields.
It feels like the podcasts are just going to merge at some point. We're just going to have one shared team that we both cover.
So let's talk about another player the Falcons picked up, former Bear, also sort of 1-year player alongside Wilkinson and Damien Williams, and that's Teez Tabor. He started out on the Bears practice squad, I believe, at the end of 2020, spent most of this past season on the practice squad, but then late in the year got an opportunity, I think, in that Week 15 game where the Bears and the Vikings were both kind of hard hit by COVID and whatnot, and so he was kind of thrust into the starting line at safety. I know Tabor came into the league several years back as a corner, and there was concerns about his ability, his athleticism to hold up at that position, and ultimately the Bears moved him to safety. So I guess my question is two-pronged. How did he look at safety, and do you feel like that's the position for him, and how was his performance in that one sort of game where he got an opportunity?
Yeah, they've seemed to really hone in on him at that safety spot. And it felt like one of these Ryan Pace reclamation projects of go out and get a former second-round pick that I'm assuming they liked quite a bit coming out of the draft. The Lions, I think, took him in that second round, but maybe a little bit rich for the expectations that would come for him. But he seemed to settle in a bit more at safety. And I thought, like when he was slated to start in that game, I mean, he was really their fifth string safety. And that's, Eddie Jackson was out, I think, the veteran next to him was out, and then Deion Bush and DeAndre Carson, the regular backups are out. Like it was a mess, and they had to just throw Teez Tabor out there. And we were expecting some kind of disaster going up against, Justin Jefferson and the Vikings passing offense. And he surprisingly held his own particularly well, right? He's not going to be, again, not a guy you want to have to rely on as a starter or really anything more than a special teams player if you can avoid it. But there is some versatility there to put him back at cornerback if you're in an absolute pinch there. And in that game, right, made a couple of tackles, made a couple of, just like completion underneath, step up and make the play. It wasn't really like targeted deep downfield or really stressed or, in some of those specific ways that you were worried about. Maybe the Vikings trying to identify a weakness in him because the Bears had other weaknesses in the secondary that were just as easily attacked with the likes of Justin Jefferson. So he wasn't really, exposed or put on the spot a ton. And honestly, sometimes one of those games where you don't hear a safety's name for a while or don't really see him on the screen because they're off the screen the whole time, it can be a really good thing for somebody like Jalen Teez Tabor. So again, I think it's a depth fit for Atlanta and someone that I think Ryan Pace, who now in the Falcons organization, wants to kind of keep developing and see if they can squeeze a little bit more out of. And, maybe there's something there, but at the very least, there's some special teams there that can help out.
Yeah, and when he played in Detroit, the Falcons' current special teams coordinator was also an assistant on that coaching staff. So, it's both the Ryan Pace and Marcus Williams sort of dynamic, seemingly identifying a player that, they feel like maybe he has a little bit more upside than he's shown so far in his NFL career. Now, sort of wrapping up today's sort of talk with you, Lorin, I do want to talk more broader, more general questions about the Bears offseason. Clearly, they're rebuilding around Justin Fields, sort of losing some big name players like Allen Robinson, like Khalil Mack, Eddie Goldman, and of course, Pat O'Donnell, probably the biggest name of them all. But sort of what are your thoughts on the Bears, as a team right now after this sort of first week of free agency? Is this a situation where with the new general manager, with the new head coach, they're seemingly going to, go hard in the draft? Because they've been relatively quiet, at least from my perspective, in free agency. So where are your thoughts on this Bears all season so far?
Yeah, they're very clearly setting their sights more long-term than short-term, right? Moving on from these veterans that have been around in the organization from the previous regime and getting a lot of their own guys in there. But specifically, it seems like they're getting more guys that they want to see if they are or are not going to be long-term foundation pieces. It's been a lot of 1 and 2 year deals, relatively cheap, where the first year will be kind of guaranteed. Second year, they can kind of make it a team option to see if you want to keep him around and see if this guy is going to be part of the long-term plan or not at a lot of these different positions across the board. Wide receiver with Equanimous St. Brown brought in and a few others, and defensive line rebuild with, I guess, they tried to sign Larry Ogunjobi, failed his physical and ultimately moved on from him and replaced him with, again, more of these sort of cheaper defensive linemen that are not quite as household name. It was Justin Jones and Muhammad Al-Qadin Muhammad from the Indianapolis Colts. It's been kind of it's an uneasy spot where it's you have this championship window with Justin Fields right now on the rookie contract where part of you is well, no, let's get as much as we can around him and start going. And part of it's well, no, is it realistic to expect him in year 2 to make this astronomical leap to Super Bowl caliber quarterback? Probably not. We can be patient with it. So they still need to add more, right? And it's hard to get super fired up about the plan until you see the rest of the plan play out, because the offensive line could still use at least one more starter. They still need another starting wide receiver. They still need to figure out what their secondary is going to look like. So right now the team is kind of in shambles and kind of has a lot of turnover and a lot of unheralded, unproven guys at a bunch of spots where you're it doesn't seem like they've gotten anywhere close to better right now yet. But the idea being that some younger players see whether they're part of this foundation. And then once you kind of have this baseline established of the new regime has their guys in, maybe the next offseason, you go big on a big free agent and you try and get that like win now moves to hit that window in the second or in the third and fourth years of Justin Fields' rookie contract. So right now, I think Bears fans have been hyper analyzing a video of Justin Fields working out and his throwing motion. It looks a little bit quicker and a little bit tighter. And that's what we're holding on to right now is just maybe his mechanics are going to be that much better. And that's what we have to be positive about.
Okay. Well, I when I consider the Bears to be the alternate reality Falcons, I do not necessarily miss hyper analyzing, videos and social media posts to see, okay, is this player going to have a big year two breakout? So I don't miss that aspect of it. So it's good on you, Lorin. So we'll just sort of have to see. It sounds like you're saying that it seems like this is going to be more of an evaluation year. That was a term that we in Atlanta threw around last year with this sort of the new coaching staff. So it's just kind of figuring out who's good, who's not, and then maybe potentially making a push thereafter. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. It's not quite tanking. They still want to win games, but they're clearly not going all in on the Super Bowl this year.
There you go. So, Lorin, I really do appreciate you joining me and talking about these Bears free agents, these former Bears free agents. I'm sure there'll be plenty more, on deck for the Falcons once they get their own offseason question marks settled, when they figure out what's going on at the quarterback position. But I look forward to future conversations with you should we need to have those, because I'm sure, now that Ryan Pace is here, he's clearly, pulling some strings here, which it doesn't seem like a good idea to me, but we'll sort of see how that plays out for the Falcons. But let the people know sort of what you got on deck over at Locked On Bears and elsewhere.
Just hope that they give Ryan Pace complete control over like the 4th and 5th rounds of the draft, because he kills it there every single year. But on Twitter at Locked On Bears, my Twitter account is at Cox Sports One, and doing the Locked On Podcast Network jam here, always kind of keeping up with team and on everything you need covered on this organization. So appreciate you having me on, and I'm sure the next Bears free agent coming to Atlanta will happen in the next 7 days here, and I'll be back again soon.
There you go. All right, Lorin, really appreciate it, and that will do it for us here, guys. So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on our Free Agent Friday episode. Probably a couple of other moves that we can talk about next week. Obviously, Monday's episode will be a mock draft Monday episode, and we'll see what mock draft I can discover that's come out over the last week. We'll see if we can maybe talk about the quarterbacks, right? Because I do plan on, getting into the draft conversation starting next week. Usually we kind of wait till April 1st. But, it feels like, otherwise I'd just be complaining about the Falcons on the podcast. And Lord knows you guys don't want any more of that. So next week we should start the pivot towards the draft. And that will include a lot of more conversations about some of these quarterback prospects with various guests and whatnot. And we're 5 weeks away from the draft. So a lot of draft content coming over the next 5 weeks of the podcast. So make sure you stay tuned. If you want to provide your feedback to anything that was discussed on today's episode, of course, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at Locked On Falcons, or lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, guys. And before we duck out of here, I always want to recommend your second listen after you've made Locked On Falcons your first listen. Of course, in addition to checking out Locked On Braves and Locked On Hawks and Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On NFL, why not check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast? And they will certainly be doing their own mock draft Monday. Maybe we'll be using Ryan Tracy or Eric Crocker's mock draft on the upcoming mock draft Monday. Who knows? So go check out Locked On NFL Draft podcast on the same podcast platforms you can find Locked On Falcons, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, or of course on YouTube, guys. I appreciate you for dealing with my gripes this week, and I hope you have a great weekend. Get out and see the sun, and don't spend too much energy worrying about how Ryan Pace is wrecking the Falcons this weekend. So appreciate it, guys. Till then.